This is the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast, where divorce coach Corey Shapiro helps you get creative and not reactive in your divorce. Tune in now and get the support you need to make it through this difficult time. Here's Corey Shapiro.
Welcome, it's Corey, your friendly divorce coach, helping you get divorced without losing your mind. It's true. It's possible to get a divorce without losing your mind, and I'm here to help you discover how to do that. Why should you be listening to me? Well, I wrote a book about divorce, getting divorced without losing your mind. I did the Audible version. You can find the ebook on Amazon. I'm also a child of divorce. I came home one day when I was 8 years old. My mom wasn't home. She invested in her short-term self. We're going to answer a question today about how we have to invest in our long-term self. Because when we invest in our short-term self, there's repercussions, there's consequences to our decisions, which can be very painful to you, to your children, and to your future life and family, and even to your friends. So think about focusing on your future self. That's what this podcast, that's what this coaching is all about. I'm also a divorce attorney in New York City, and I try to help my clients play the long game, not deal with these short-term battles that come up constantly in the divorce, and especially in a high or conflict divorce. All right, we're up for our quote. I couldn't figure out who came up with this quote, but it says so much. The quote goes like this, and it hit me really hard. Someone once told me the definition of hell. The last day you have on earth, the person you became will meet the person you could have become. Wow, that's bracing, at least to me, because I'm thinking, what happens if I did more, didn't quit when I was tired, loved more, wasn't so reactive when I was mad, didn't lay into someone even if they deserved it, and played the long game. You know, my favorite communication coach, author, teacher, Marshall Rosenberg, who wrote that great book, Nonviolent Communication, he says it himself. Sometimes he gets into an argument with his wife. He's not around anymore. But even if you are, quote unquote, a guru like he was or is to me, he's not perfect. We're all human. We're doing the best we can. So can we do a little better? Like that 10% better. Remember that book that came out, 10% better? Can you do 10% better to close that gap or close that delta? Well, I hope we can. All right, in this episode, we're going to answer a question about what to think about when moving out of the marital residence. Talk about that dichotomy about your short-term needs. I want to get out of here. This is horrible. I don't want to be in a toxic situation. I am stressed. I need to feel good. I can't sleep at night. I got to work with your future self, with the consequences that you might not even be thinking about. That's what we're going to be discussing here in this podcast episode. But before we do so, let's talk about divorce news. You know, I've been talking about New Jersey. They've been doing some different ideas to deal with the backlog of cases they had caused by the pandemic, caused by judge shortages. I think a lot of the judges retired during the pandemic, or maybe they had budget cuts or a combination. The first idea was just to assign or reassign judges from other parts to the matrimonial parts. But then some judges says, I don't really know anything about matrimonial law, so it might be better to just go on the street and find someone, and maybe they could decide your case. Because I can't really bring any insight. I don't do this. I'm a criminal judge or I'm a corporate judge. It's very particular, our field, very particular. And you have to have certain sensitivities to be a really wise judge. And that's what you need, a wise judge. So now they have understand that people aren't happy having any old person making a decision. They want wiser judges. So New Jersey said, well, okay, fine. We're just not going to do trials. We're not going to do any trials. You want a trial? We'll see you in 2 years. Get on the line. And obviously for litigators, that could be problematic because lawyers bill by the hour. If you can't try a case, you're not making any money. So there was an article with a couple of lawyers being quoted, And one lawyer in particular made the following comment that I thought was interesting. It says, if you can afford to go to arbitration, it's probably a good alternative. That sounds positive. But then it goes on to say, but if you can barely afford your attorney, I don't know how you're affording arbitration. First of all, if you can barely afford your attorney, you shouldn't be in a contested divorce. Litigation is not inexpensive. And I tell people as a rule of thumb, unless you're making over $1 million a year constantly, you got to be very efficient, very creative. You can't just spend all your money on these battles, quote unquote battles. You got to play the long game. So if you are just forced to go to court because of some emergency issue, that's one thing. But if you're the 90% of people who are just what I call position polarization, where you're just stuck on a position, that's where you go to mediators. That's where you can go to a collaborative attorney or even an arbitrator, a decision maker to help you see the light. Is your position realistic or is it a fantasy, right? And I want you to think about this concept. I heard it, and when I first heard it, it was a little confusing for my brain. So I'm going to try to go slow, but maybe you'll pick it up faster than I did. It goes like this. I could do it either cheap, fast, or good, but you can only pick two. So if you want it cheap and fast, those are the two, it's not going to be good. And if you want it cheap and good, it's not going to be fast. Now, judges are cheap, right? They don't cost anything. It's funded by the government. You do have to pay for your time to go to court. You have to pay for your attorney, but judges are cheap. But remember, you can only pick two. So what do you want? You want cheap. You obviously want good. You don't want just fast. You want good. So if it's cheap and good, it's not going to be fast. And that's the problem with litigation. Now, let's contrast that with arbitration. Now, I'm a big believer in mediation. I'm a big believer in collaborative law. On the other hand, sometimes you just need a decider. You just have two people who are never going to change their minds. It's like, I'm not going to agree. You're not going to agree. So why don't we just stop arguing and get a decider? And that's what an arbitrator can do. And they can be so helpful. So an arbitrator is not cheap. They get billed like lawyer time. They're hourly in most cases, or maybe a day rate or a half day rate. But they could be fast and good. And that's what we're talking about in the budget. Wouldn't you rather save all the time? So even if you have to invest in an arbitrator or a mediator, if you guys can move away from your positions, in most cases, I would say at least 90%, you're really going to come out ahead than if you're going to dig your heels in and litigate, even if you're in a jurisdiction like New Jersey, which takes years to get a trial date. All right, it's time for question of the week. If you have a question you would like answered, please go to question.gettingdivorced.org, and I may answer your question on an upcoming episode of the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast. This week's question is from Marty. Marty asks, I want to move out. I understand this may impact issues in my divorce. I spoke with a mediator who suggested we enter into a move out agreement, which basically says that my move out won't be cited as an abandonment. I can move back in with 1 month's notice. We agree that any money that's transferred between us is not going to be used in any court proceedings. And we agree that this doesn't mean I can pay such amount or that my spouse needs such amount. We also going to agree that any parenting plans we come up with cannot be used in court and is not an indication by either of us that we think this is a suitable arrangement for our family. What do you think? Well, first of all, Marty, I'm feeling you. Got that tension between your short-term desires that you want to move out, and I get it. It makes sense. Why would you want to be in a bad situation? As my mom used to say, or does say, we're not getting any younger. So why would you want to be in a bad situation? On the other hand, you're thinking tactically. How can this impact me? What happens if things aren't collaborative? What happens if things change? You're worried about what you're doing, how this can impact you. And I think that's the calculus. That's the thinking I want people to have. We all have that immediate reaction. Like marketing's so good at making us want to buy things we don't need. Oh, wow. See something, it pops up. I want to buy it. But maybe that moment will pass. So an idea, for example, in that situation is you can have a wish list. And maybe every quarter, once a year, twice a year, you look at the wish list and see if anything the marketing told you to buy, you still actually want. Otherwise, you're probably just going to buy things that you will probably not use and don't care about, but you still paid for. And it's very hard to build wealth if you're spending all your money on things you don't even need to take care of your short-term needs. So just like here, we can't think of our short-term needs, only we got to think about our future needs. So thank you, Marty, for doing that, for asking this question. My perspective is this, and it's a little bracing. And remember, I tell people I'm like a wartime general. I've been to war for 2 decades, and now I'm trying to move more into diplomacy because I see the limitations of war, see the limitations of litigation. And you saw that in New Jersey. Very limited what you can do, and you need so much money and time to actually do it right that in most cases it's just not worth it. So the saying I tell people is an agreement is only as good as the person you enter into it with. That means if you're collaborative, you can enter into what I'm going to call an aspirational. And that's what it sounds like. These are aspirational agreements. You can have an email, you can have a letter, you can have a handshake. It's just aspirational. We're going to be nice. That's all that. All I'm hearing is we're going to be nice. And that might be enough. That might be enough. If everyone plays nice, right? We don't need locks on our door. Right? We don't need to lock our door if people aren't going to come in. But we have locks. We always lock our door. We lock our car door. We accept reality. We accept human nature. Human nature can change. What I want you to start thinking about is if we're going to enter into an agreement, either we're going to just accept that we are aspirational, we're collaborative, it may not be enforceable in court, there's a risk, but I'm willing to take that risk because I don't really want to deal with this. Or we're going to trust that we have a good relationship, but we're going to verify it. And by verifying it, what I would suggest is you consult an attorney, could be a mediator as well, who can help you on this, and you enter into an enforceable agreement. And that's one with a detailed parenting plan, a detailed interim support. It doesn't take too long. It's not going to cost so much money. You don't have to resolve every issue, but those 2 issues can be important. A parenting schedule, and who's going to pay for what? Who's paying for the mortgage? Who's paying for the rent? Who's paying for school, for the kids? All those things are important, and they should be decided. And any of these informal, aspirational, collaborative agreements, they're not going to give you certainty that the judge won't look at it and won't be influenced by it. All right, it's time for the positive perspective. My positive perspective is this: trust, but verify. You remember, I think it's a Russian proverb that was made famous here by President Reagan. Trust, verify. So yeah, we can have a trusting relationship, but we're going to verify it with an agreement. If we're worried, if we're thinking about risk management, if we're thinking long term. So trust, but verify. All right, that's a wrap on this episode. I'm so glad you're taking a creative and practical approach to your divorce. Keep up the good work, and remember to stay focused on yourself and the things that you can control. You can do this. You're not alone. You got me on this podcast. You got my book. You got Audible. We also have resources on gettingdivorced.org, all helping you get divorced without losing your mind.
Thank you for tuning in to the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast with divorce coach Corey Shapiro. Divorce can be a difficult and overwhelming process, but it doesn't have to be. Corey's book is here to help you gain clarity, composure, and a strategic mindset. Get it now as an ebook on Amazon or an audiobook on Audible, and unlock the power of these resources to make more informed decisions and gain a better understanding of the process.
This podcast offers general information only. It cannot replace legal advice. If you need tailored advice, contact an attorney licensed to practice in your area.